Hello and welcome to Blades and Banners, a Tales of the Valiant actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. Happy Friday. This is another episode of the Ship's Log. As you can see, I am not joined by any of the players. Scheduling's been tricky lately, so I'm giving them a break from this. And tonight I'm going to talk about, well, it's night where I am right now, but I'm going to talk about writer's block. We've got some questions from viewers, but I'm going to talk about it completely unscripted, which I feel like is appropriate for the topic. The truth is, I run a lot of games. I am, or until quite recently, I was running, I guess, 4 different games, and that's down a little bit. I think at max I was once running 5 games, and that was too many. And I know there are people who do this professionally, who run a lot more games, but as someone with a regular adult life, a lot of games going on. And no, they weren't weekly or anything like that. So, but it was a lot of games and they were all different. I wasn't running the same adventure for any 2 games. And so it was a lot of different preps. And the last couple of months, a whole bunch of real world stuff coincided to significantly upgrade my stress levels. We're in the middle of a difficult situation trying to rehome one of our dogs. There were just a bunch of things with the end of the school year and just a whole lot of other real life stuff that you don't want to hear about. That all just have really gotten me, frankly, pretty stressed out lately. And one result of that is I have been creatively pretty blocked. Writing, painting, a lot of just the things that I do creatively have just been stuck for a bit. And while I can take a break from painting minis, though I like doing it, taking a break from painting minis a little bit, I don't want to give up tabletop role playing games. I like gaming with my friends. It's one of my social outlets, and I just really enjoy doing it. So trying to continue when you're having a really hard time getting creative juices flowing is tricky, and this is probably the worst it's been. You get stuck, you get burnt out, things like that happen, but this is probably the worst it's been for me as a GM. And I mean, the thing I'm doing is a fun thing. It's not what I do for a living. It doesn't make me any money. So things could be a lot worse. Uh, but it's something I like doing and I want to keep doing it. So what am I doing about it? Well, the good news is there are some things I have found work for me in overcoming writer's block. And the problem, of course, is this is not really very useful advice. This is just sort of telling you what I do. So it's only useful advice if you're a lot like me, I guess. I found that physical creativity uh, helps me break out of mental blockage, I guess. I've been shooting my bow a lot more. I did a whole bunch of backyard gardening projects in the last few weeks, and that's helped a little bit. Just clear the head, gets you centered, gets a focal activity that helps you, I don't know, empty your mind a little bit to let things flow a bit more. And that's been helping. But in a lot of cases, I've found that I just have to pull resources together. Now, I'm not someone who wants to let a chatbot write adventures for me. I have never let a chatbot write an adventure, so I don't know if any of them are any good at it. Maybe they are, but I don't. I don't know. I don't really like doing that. But there are some really good things out there that can really help. If you're using 5th edition or a D20 thing, this isn't really stuck to it, but the actual Eberron source book from the 2014 5th edition, Rising from the Last War, actually has a bunch of tables built for putting together Eberron specific adventures. I, of course, run Eberron. It's got a table for your patron, for the goal, for the things like that. There are also a lot of systems out there that have adventure worksheets. One system I've been looking at a lot has been the Outgunned system, and the adventure genre book, which is kind of aimed at the Indiana Jones subgenre of action, has this great worksheet where you're working out what's the treasure you're after, what's the rival like, and there's a little sub worksheet for the rival with their strengths and their weaknesses and their assets, and the setting and all these things. It's got little worksheets. I've found that kind of thing really helpful, way more helpful personally than the rollable tables that you would find in a lot of the fifth edition books. Having some kind of worksheet, getting sitting down, actually writing out the worksheet, getting my pen moving, um, that really helps because once, and I'm sure if you do a lot of writing, I'm sure you've encountered this. Once you start writing, things flow a little better. The words just kind of flow through. And so that's been another thing that I've been using a lot of is finding worksheets. And there have been some other occasions where this has happened or where I've been in a pinch. And there's one thing you can do in GMing for tabletop games that's really not an option in other creative pursuits, and that is to just flagrantly steal. I'm playing a make believe game. I'm not publishing a novel. If I just blatantly plagiarize someone else's work um, and adapt it to a game, that's not really a problem. I buy adventures, of course, but I don't usually do that because I have a hard time sticking to them. But one game I will play with myself that has often helped me create adventures when I'm stuck is pretty much anytime I watch a movie, one of the things that goes through my mind is how would I make that a D&D adventure? Or sometimes a D&D campaign, depending on the scale of the movie. Books will sometimes be that way for me. In Kyber Shards one time, I got stuck because Eric was going to be out and I was going to be down to 2 players, and that's really kind of hard to design a game around 2 players. And I decided, okay, what needs to happen is we need to go to the Feywild and we're going to run Jabberwocky. That was everything I had when that adventure started. I don't remember what, I think it's maybe around episode 140 or something like that. But it's the Feywild adventure with just Pog and Shade, and that was the whole thing. Is I decided we would go to the Feywild because it's really easy to do a bottle episode in another plane. By the way, just if you're ever stuck and you have a cool idea you want to run, but it's going to take you away from the campaign, just pull them into an alternate plane of some kind, because that's a really great way to do a bottle episode that doesn't have to adjust the plot of what's going on in the primary world. So pulling them into the Feywild, pulling them into the astral plane, pulling them into the elemental chaos, whatever you have, depending on the world you're in. So I tend to go with Feywild because you can get real crazy, or at least I find it very easy to get real crazy. And I didn't really have a session planned. I decided we would go to the Feywild, so I kidnapped someone they would definitely follow into the Feywild, and I decided Jabberwocky. I knew the poem, and so we got there, and I just had the words of the poem become the structure of the adventure. After the session, the adventure was going to continue going on, and so I had a week to plan it. At that point, I decided to pull in other stories, the Green Knight, things like that. But in general, I just stole Lewis Carroll's work and the old story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and strung those together into an adventure. And that's a thing that is less cool in novels or in writing, uh, unless you can put a really fresh spin on it. All I was doing was taking these things and using them as the structure for an adventure. So if you're ever just really, really stuck, one of the things that I tend to find easy is to use a story you really like as one of those worksheets, as the bones that you build the adventure around. I'm fairly good at improvising characters, and so writer's block doesn't hurt me so bad there. It's mostly just adventure ideas. And so trying to pull adventures out of the world around me is important. Another option that I have found helpful is just try to see what the players will chase. Um, a lot of times, I think the place where GMs get burnt out or get blocked is thinking too much that they have to hold the steering wheel, that they have to be the ones driving the story forward. And maybe early in a campaign, you kind of do. But once a campaign's got legs, if you just sort of let go and see where the players will drift the story, that will usually open up new avenues. And at least for me, that causes me to start asking new questions. And once I'm asking questions, I have an easier time pushing forward. If a campaign's if you're well into a campaign and you get stuck, a thing for me is to think of what's an NPC we haven't heard from in a while. Bring that NPC in either with a problem or as a problem, which is often more fun, especially if it's a friend showing up as a problem. You know, the villain crashes their airship through the front of your base and swarms out with bad guys. That's a cool combat encounter. Nothing wrong with that at all. Somebody comes through the door with a gun is a great way to move the story forward. But your friend crashes their airship into your house because they're being pursued by the cops because they accidentally won a magical artifact that is precious to an elven nation in a poker game is really good. And I just made that up. A nice thing about a world of magic, if you're running a game in a world of magic, but a nice thing about a world of magic is you can really explain a lot of nonsense. Your story that you come up with does not have to be grounded in the same way that it might if you're trying to tell a story firmly planted in the real world. And so string together a bunch of nonsense, treat it like a Mad Lib, and just go is a pretty viable method. You can just let your players drive. Like I said, another option is ask your players. This isn't necessarily as fun if we're recording it, but if you're just stuck, ask your players what they want to get into, especially if they're higher level, if they've got some influence over the world. Express it as listen, there's some downtime, there's relative peace. You've given the bad guy enough of a setback that they're unlikely to recover for a little bit. What would your characters try to do? And maybe you'll end up with a shopping episode, but as long as the players are and you are having fun, that might not be the end of the world. But maybe you'll end up with some kind of crazy story or the beginnings of a really crazy story. And that's not everyone's comfort level. If you're really, really uncomfortable GMing, improvising as a GM, that might be really hard. But a lot of times you can take just as a cheat sheet to have in your back pocket. If you take any published adventure that you're fond of and just strip all of the proper nouns out of it and just write down somewhere in your GMing notebook the bare bones structure of this adventure. So like my favorite eberron adventure is Whispers of the Vampire Blade by David Noonan. I ran this in Kyber Shards and really liked it. Unfortunately, that means I can't easily run it again in Blades and Banners. But I will almost certainly run it for someone else at some point because I just really like this adventure. But if we were to just strip all of the pieces off of it, what we've really got is this: the player characters are contacted by the authorities, the king, the spy agency, the cops, the authorities, for help because a powerful weapon has been stolen by a rogue agent. The rogue agent flees to a major social occasion. The rogue agent flees to some sort of form of rapid transport. The middle fun section of this, where we're on a train, gets tricky if we're not in Eberron. And the rogue agent flees aboard a ship in Eberron. It's an airship, but it doesn't have to be. So you've got four set pieces, four set piece encounters that the villain needs to escape each time and keep going, or the adversary needs to escape each time and get going. You can really change those four set pieces. So the real bare bones, to strip it all the way down, is the heroes get a job chasing a rogue agent with a powerful weapon. There are four set piece encounters with chase elements in between. You can probably run with the beginnings of that. If you just get stuck and need to throw something on the table, you can probably run the beginnings of that for a session, and then that buys you enough time to get to the next session. That's the nice thing about GMing, is if you just have to make something up for a session, you're buying yourself enough time to actually be able to think about what questions were raised by what happened in the session. And that's what your next session will be, is answering those questions. If you really want to bring the players sort of behind the screen on this, when you get to the end of that first session of an adventure, ask the players, or even ask the player characters, what questions do you have at this point? And spend the next week or the next month or the next couple of weeks or however long between your sessions thinking about those questions and answering those questions. And that becomes the bare bones of your next session. So there are a lot of ways to take the pressure off of you when inspiration isn't striking, and invite others to provide some of that inspiration. I've done that a lot with Blades and Banners, because with the much, much more open geographic area that this game is taking place in compared to Kyber Shards, um, I have to be a little more prepared for a variety of things depending on what the players do. And I'm going to talk about some of that in answering some of these questions. So I'm going to jump into these questions here. First question comes from Mia. Having done some writing but never GM before, is there a significant difference in the way the block hits? I don't. Well, okay. So I GM and I've done a little writing, but not a lot of serious writing. So I don't know, and I don't know if it's going to be the same for everyone. It probably isn't. Um, for me, I think the big difference is, while when writing, unless you're coming up on a deadline of some kind, being stuck, the frustration is just that I'm stuck. As a GM, for me at least, the frustration is I'm stuck and I'm letting down my friends. I'm letting down the people who are expecting me to run the game for them. And that for me feels worse. Now, if you're a professional writer and you're writing with deadlines, then you have that as well. In addition to, and this is also my livelihood, and I don't have that pressure, thank goodness. But the added pressure of, I feel like I'm letting my friends down when I'm stuck, is hard. That I would say is an added element to this, at least for me, as someone who is entirely amateur, both as a writer and as a GM. Josh says, for TTRPGs, this seems like it would come up more for recorded games, but it could apply for other media too. Do you ever catch yourself, especially during instances of writer's block, being tempted to run with things you weren't planning on that fans have suggested in comments or previous Q&As? I have occasionally had fans guess what I was doing, and the thing that they guess to me seems better than what I was going to do. I have never adjusted it to that, unless, and this is something that I did with Blades and Banners, unless I've asked. So as I was getting ready for Blades and Banners, I needed a bunch of principalities. There's not a ton written about the Lazar principalities, and so you don't have all the details like I had in Stormreach. So I needed a lot of NPCs. I needed a lot of different pirates. I needed a lot of different principalities. So I reached out to other gamers that I know, some of whom watch the show, but many of whom are just people I play games with, and asked them to create me a pirate crew, or create a principality or a port town or something like that that could fit into this. Vale was created out of a suggestion that I got from a player friend. It wasn't exactly this that was the suggestion, but the suggestion they gave me, which was about a pirate crew, inspired the existence of Vale. The pirate ship full of lycanthropes uh, was um, was a suggestion from a friend, and so a lot of that, yeah, absolutely. But uh, tempted, maybe, but I've never done it unless it's something I've specifically asked for suggestions on, because I think the fun of guessing, and I like that the viewers of these shows are trying to guess what's happening. And I feel like if I adjust because either I adjust to change it so their guess wasn't right, or I really like their guess and so I adjust to make their guess right. I don't know. I feel like that takes some of the fun out of it. It's like taking some of the sportingness out of it. So I've never have ended up doing it. Though I have occasionally been tempted because a few of y'all have had ideas that I think were better than what I was actually doing. Josh asks, do you have any tips when you want to adapt something other than a mechanic, like a creature or an adventure module, from another system to one that you're playing in, particularly when it wouldn't be easily compatible? An example would be different editions of D&D and other D20 based systems are easily compatible, while 7th Sea or FFG and West End Star Wars RPGs would not be easily compatible. I have done that, and my general advice is to try and work out what you like about it. If what you like about it is the story, then you can take the story and just adapt. At that point, you are just adapting the mechanics. You don't necessarily need to create new monsters. Pull the monster stat block that already exists that's closest to what you're after. If you need a bunch of different kinds, it doesn't matter if it really matches it at all. You know, just because the stat block says orc doesn't mean it can't be any other sort of humanoid, or for that matter, anything else. The winter wolf stat block is a huge monster with cold resistance and a breath weapon. There's nothing that says that can't be some kind of dragon or anything else. You know, so uh, yeah, that's my big pull. I know that's really simple as an answer, but I would generally just say keep the story that you like and just pull the mechanics that you need from your game based on what's closest. There is no reason to reinvent the owlbear. Someone's already done it for you. Just grab the stat block that you need. And also, if you don't exactly want to do that, for just about every RPG system out there, someone has tried to adapt it to run the kind of fantasy that D&D is. And so look around online a little bit. Go to the subreddits and that kind of thing. You'll usually find someone who has tried to homebrew this, and even if you don't like the way they've done it, you might find at least a starting point for your working on it. That's what I would say. On a similar note, do you make lists of stuff that would be interesting to include in future games as inspiration strikes during day-to-day life? What sorts of non-game related things do you find yourself drawing inspiration from? I don't do this a lot. I do have a tab on my OneNote where I will just jot down notions that come to me, but that's usually more like, oh, I thought of this thing. Wouldn't that be cool in D&D? And I'll write it down. Occasionally, I will learn about things from history and want them to exist. Places. There's I can't remember where it is. It's in Southeast Asia. I can't remember if it's Thailand or Cambodia, but there's a place in Southeast Asia called Dragon Rock, and it's this big plateau that looks from one angle like the head of a dragon emerging from the jungle. And so, yeah, of course, I remember that, and it absolutely exists somewhere in an RPG world that I will run one day. And of course, in that world, it will be a petrified dragon or the birthplace of dragons, or something like that. I've borrowed a lot of old mythology and used it in games. I've borrowed a lot of poetry, Jabberwocky, The Stolen Child, um, and used them in games. So yeah, I'll borrow a lot of things from that. There's a there's I can't remember what it's called. There's a social media account like Lawful Goodwill or something like that, where they'll post pictures of items from secondhand stores as if they were magic items and pitch what they would do. I think that sort of thing is hysterical, and I have occasionally seen an item in a museum or seen an item at a store and thought that's got to exist somewhere in my D&D world. Um, but yeah, that kind of thing, but not a ton of things out of the real world other than maybe geographic locations or history that I will draw in. Voices, I certainly borrow a lot of voices when I can imitate them well, and occasionally sort of character types. I once populated a town with the sort of character archetypes that you find in the series Deadwood, because I could do most of those voices, and that was fun. Do you ever play around with building your own classes, subclasses, species, etc. for games that you run or play in? I've never tried to build a class from the ground up, but species, subclasses, magic items, not very good at monsters. But the other things, yeah. I'm playing a monk in a game that a friend of mine's running that has a high focus on formal dueling, and he's let me design a monk subclass around formal duels. I borrowed a lot of those notions from. I took a lot of inspiration from Edge Studios' fifth edition adaptation of their Legends of the Five Rings, called Adventures in Rokugan, I think. Um, and their dueling rules are really cool, and so I borrowed some inspiration from that. In another game, my wife wanted to play an Abhorsen, which is an undead hunter, essentially from a series of novels by Garth Nix that starts with Sabriel, which if you haven't read, it's really good. And I created a subclass. We created it initially as a paladin, and then I adapted it into a blood hunter because that made more sense. That um, that tied to that. Uh, I adapted. I did a thing where I took the Battlemaster fighter and turned it into a ranger subclass for a friend. So yeah, once you've played a game for a long time, you kind of start to see the numbers work, and it becomes a lot easier to homebrew it. So yeah, I do a lot of that kind of homebrewing of player options. I've never done a whole class. I don't know what I would consider to be missing in the classes, but subclasses and species and magic items. Yeah, I've done a lot of that. Any material you'd recommend as good exercises to help with writer's block? Journaling is a good exercise because you don't have to write a specific thing. It's just a blank page, and the goal is to fill it up with words. Uh, and no one has to ever read them. So you can tear them out and throw them away or incinerate them if you want to. And so the pressure is completely off. Um, as I mentioned, take a movie or TV show you like, or episode of a TV show you like, and ask yourself, how would I adapt that into a D&D adventure? You might find that you like it well enough that you actually use it. Again, just strip out the personal pronouns and go for it. That's when I use a lot. It's my wife has my wife is very tolerant of the fact that that's usually what I do on the way home from a movie. So those are good exercises, I find. And other than that, anything that clears your mind. Archery is a really good stillness exercise for me. And so that's something that I do that I find that really clears my mind. Gardening is also something, or just being out among trees. I find mentally clarifying. Um, I like to do that alone for the purposes of mental clarity, but I'm an introvert, so for you extroverts, maybe with people would help better. But that's my general view on it. Any material about the craft of writing that you'd recommend, both for TTRPG adventure campaign creation and/or for writing in general? Wow. There are a lot of books. My wife is a professional writer, and so she would have better recommendations. But here are some that I have liked. My dad got me a book called On Writing Well, when I went into college, and that was really good just for the form of writing. That's not as applicable, I think, to the craft of GMing, but for writing, it's good as just sort of a handbook. Stephen Pressfield, who's a historical fiction novelist that I really like, wrote a book called The War of Art, which I gave to Eric, and he really liked as well. That's a lot about the craft of writing and overcoming what he calls resistance, which is the thing that stops you from being creative, whether it's writing or another creative exercise. Andrew Peterson, who's a novelist and singer songwriter, wrote a book called Adorning the Dark, where he talks a lot about the value of community to creativity and of art to community. He's talking from a faith-based perspective, which so not all of it will be relevant to everyone, but a lot of it is just really strong advice from for any kind of creative pursuit. Uh, his last chapter is really just sort of a I think he calls it nuts and bolts, I think, and it's just like I don't know a dozen different concrete things you can do to help you be more creative. And I like that quite a lot. Uh, that's really good, and I think that really applies to a lot to this creative process because of the communal aspect that D&D is. I think it a lot of that communal aspect is really applicable. He's of course talking about it primarily from a songwriting perspective, but that too is a in a lot of ways a communal activity. Music is I think I think we created music to be shared and to be communal. So I think there's a lot of overlap between that kind of storytelling and this kind of storytelling, and I found that to be really really interesting just in my own creative. I reread it quite recently as I was dealing with some of this writer's block, and it was helpful. So I recommend all of those as just books on writing or on creative craft in general. I find them to be yeah, I have found them to be beneficial. So I'm sure there are more. If you've got suggestions of things that you've read about creativity in general, please share them. Oh, there's for one specifically on GMing that I can mention is called the GM's Guide to Proactive Role Playing, and that's by Jonah and Tristan Fissel. Did I get that right? Fischel, sorry. Jonah and Tristan Fischel. It's really good. It's got a lot of advice for how to run a game in a very different way. And sometimes shaking things up helps shake things loose. So that's definitely worthwhile. That's worthwhile whether you've got writer's block or not. That's just, I think, a worthwhile read as a GM. It's got a lot of really interesting ideas about how to organize a game. And what are some upcoming TTRPGs, games, books, materials, etc. that you're looking forward to? Um, Books, etc. I'm always looking forward to the next Guy Gavriel K fantasy novel. Stephen Fry just put out his adaptation of the Odyssey. I'm looking forward to reading that. I haven't gotten to it yet. TTRPG specific. The people who made Son of Oak games, who made City of Mist, are about to release Legends in the Mist, which is their fantasy version of that. I played one game of City of Mist, so I don't have a strong sense of it yet, but I generally liked it. It's very rules light, so you've got to be very comfortable with that, and I'm not usually. But I'm excited by seeing that applied to fantasy, especially the type of fantasy that they're going for, is very much what they're calling rustic fantasy, which is very much um, the villagers go on an adventure kind of thing. Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, and I really like that. I think that most TTRPGs have gotten away from that because not everyone likes that. Not everyone wants to start off as kind of a nobody. Um, but I like that kind of the journey is the thing, not so much the power fantasy is the thing. I've liked that way of storytelling for a long time, and I'm interested to see a ttrpg really try to focus on that. I think that's really cool. And then I mentioned Outgunned. I'm about to get to run some Outgunned for my daughter and some of her friends. This will be the first time I've been running for just a bunch of kids and with teenagers, I'm really excited to do that. Hoping that will also help just trying something very low pressure for me. We're going to do that over the course of the summer. I've been working on adapting Outgunned into Eberron, so we can run some Indiana Jones style adventures in a fantasy world with airships. I've just finished most of that document. I just need to create the equipment lists and things like that. So that should be a lot of fun. But I'm looking forward to their superhero genre book, which is coming out soon, and anything they keep putting out, because they've been putting out really quite prolifically since publishing the initial game. And I'm excited to play more of that. I think it's the first TTRPG I've read where I've gone, man, if this had been released before we started Blades and Banners, I'd have talked them into running Blades and Banners in this. And I'm not at the point where I want to try to swap systems in the middle of a recorded game, but I would absolutely have tried to talk them into this if I had encountered it prior to Blades and Banners starting it. It's just a really, really good action-centered game. So, and then our last question comes from AJ. How do you feel about a custom system or action role I have made where I allow PCs to either roll for, say, seduction, and either they roll or have to hit me with a pickup line in character, and I judge and determine the outcome? Okay, so if I understand this, the idea is when a player wants to do something that's very, very subjective, like intimidate or persuade or seduce, they get to pick. They can either pitch you their line or roll. If it works at your table, I don't have any problem with it. I'm not sure it would work at my tables. Here's the possible issue I could see. I don't know if this is something you do or if you're planning to do it and you're trying to workshop it with me. I'm not sure which. So if it's working at your table, then hey man, it works. The one thing I could think of would be I, as a player, might think I have a really good line, but you don't think it's a really good line, because what makes a really good line is somewhat subjective. There are a couple of ways I can think of working around that. The simplest one, and what I tend to do with this sort of situation, is if the player will give it to me in character and it's good, and what I mean by good is it's really in character, I might give them advantage on making the roll or lower the DC substantially, whichever way you like to do it. Lowering the DC substantially is more certain than advantage, but either way. If it's really good, I will usually not require the roll. Like if the role play that they just gave me is amazing, I'm going to skip the roll and we're just going to do it. Like they've just succeeded. If you want to try something that takes some of the pressure off of you of judging, you could put it up to the table. If you've got players who aren't going to metagame it, who are going to actually judge, and you could just do a quick, everybody thumbs up, thumbs down. Was that amazing or not? Most player groups that I have played with, they would play that fair. And that could be fun if you've got that kind of table and that kind of trust at that table. The big thing that the dice give us is objectivity. Well, I set the DC, the dice failed you there, even though your speech was great. The dice failed you there. Or even though your speech was bad, the dice won the day. The dice give us objectivity. The dice let us say, well, the dice, not, well, me. If it's just me judging whether that was good or bad, it can in some circumstances, become adversarial. Again, if you've got a really great level of trust with your players, then it probably won't, and you're fine. But that's the only thing I could think of going wrong with that. Now, in your specific case, I honestly don't usually have roles involved in courtship or seduction or something like that because it feels I don't know. We're not usually doing that casually at my games. That's usually if there's romance in my game, it's usually taken. It's usually played straight, and so that feels like it strips some of the fun out of that to me. But the broader point, still. So that would be the one thing I could see going wrong. But again, if this is working at your table, then that's great. That's really all that matters. Is if your table likes doing it this way, that's fine. My tendency would be to just reward the good role play, either by giving advantage on the roll or lowering the DC, rather than making them pick between rolling or role play, because I want them to role play, but I don't want them to feel like, well, I picked rolling, so there's no reason for me to worry about the words. I don't want to do that. I want the role play to give them an advantage in the role play, um, rather than an either or choice. So that's how I would do it at my table. But again, if it's working at your table, keep at it, man. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is all of our questions for this episode. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope this was, I don't know, useful or entertaining or whatever it was. If you got tips for overcoming your game mastery block, your adventuring block, if you've got recommendations for books about writing or books about GMing or what your favorite Game Master's Guide is, my favorite Game Master Guides were the old 4th edition ones. I think they were great. Let me know in comments down below. I'd be real interested to know what you think. In the meantime, new episodes of Blades and Banners drop on Mondays. New Ship's Log Q&As are roughly every other Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.